Hello and welcome to the Touchstones tapes, the podcast which keeps you connected with us as a museum while Touchstones is closed for refurbishment. It's me, Rick in Rochdale, recording the intro solo today, while Katie and Bryan are once again inside our hidden gem of a collection store in Rochdale. Are you there both?
Hello Rick, it's Katie back at the collection store, and I've got Bryan with me today as well. Hello Bryan.
Hello Katie, hello Rick.
And how are you today?
I'm good, Katie, I'm good. It's not so busy today in the collection store.
In this month's episode, we're going to be talking about the selection process. We get asked so much, how on earth does an object make it into the collection? So we're going to be answering that by speaking to Helen Beckett, who's from Touchstones, and she'll also be telling us more about how that process is changing. Bryan, what do you reckon?
I'm looking forward to talking more about how the collection was founded, how objects have historically entered the collection, and how we're changing this process for it to be more democratic and co-opted with communities.
Brilliant. So without further ado, let's introduce Helen, the Curatorial and Collections Engagement Coordinator. What a mouthful at Touchstones.
Let's go. So on today's episode, we're talking all about the selection process. And on our roundtable, we're speaking to Helen, who works in the Collections and Exhibitions team, to find out more about how museums make decisions. So I'd like to welcome Helen Beckett, who is the Curatorial and Collections Engagement Coordinator at Touchstones.
Well, we're welcoming her back because she did such a great job on the Queer People and Places episode. So hello, Helen.
Thanks for having me back, guys. And congratulations, Bryan, on getting my job title correct, which a lot of people don't do.
So, Helen, could you start by telling us a bit about how the collection started, how the Rochdale's collection started?
So it was sort of around the 1860s, 1870s, a group of wealthy industrialists got together and decided that Rochdale should have its own art gallery and museum. And so since then, we've been collecting from people and different groups in Rochdale. But the collections mainly started with a group of paintings, and then that kind of snowballed into collecting from other local collectors, because it was very popular during the Victorian period for people to have collections of their own. So a lot of people had natural history collections, and wealthy people collected anthropology collections because it made them look very worldly when they were at home. And since then we've developed this amazing, ginormous museum and art gallery collection.
How many objects and paintings roughly are in the collection?
Oh God, Bryan.
If you could just pop out now and just count them for us, that'd be great.
I think we've got roughly around 100,000 different objects in the museum collection. So that ranges from everyday objects to our Egyptology collection.
So obviously with so many items in the collection already and space at a premium, the process of selecting things for the collection will have changed a lot over recent years. So do you want to maybe tell us a little bit about who decides what actually goes into the collection nowadays? So at the moment we have, it's like a panel of people. It's not as scary as it sounds, but it's a group of people who meet on a regular basis, sort of every 6 weeks, to go through the donations that people have put forward or any acquisitions that we want to make, and they hear about the objects, they hear about the stories behind the objects, and then make a decision from there. But there is a criteria, so we take into account the condition of the object. If we bring it into the collection, is it going to be harmful to anything else that we have in the collection, like the size of it? Obviously, for practical reasons, we don't have a lot of space, so we can't take ginormous things. Its relationship to Rochdale, so everything has to have that local connection now, and also the story behind it. because a lot of sort of objects that we might think just things that we would have at home, if they have a really interesting story behind it, then we want to obviously preserve that object so that then we can preserve the story as well.
So it's not just a matter of what you fancy putting in there. It is much more.
No, definitely not. I think
that.
like maybe years and years ago it was about what staff, what they thought they liked kind of thing. But no, we do have a selection process now.
Do you get sort of fierce debate sometimes, though? I'd be interested to know if it sometimes kicks off.
No, I don't think we're not a very fierce team. So
that's disappointing.
I know, yeah. No, because I think a lot of the time when people are in agreement with things, like because we're all following the same sort of thought process and looking at the same criteria. Sometimes you do obviously people like, oh no, I don't think we should take that, and we have an example of that already. But yeah, most of the time usually we are in agreement with things.
We've got some objects here today, Helen, from some of the recent donations. What's this doll's house here? How did this enter, and what was sort of the conversations for that panel meeting?
So the doll's house furniture was donated by a local. Her family are local. She doesn't live locally anymore, but by a woman whose uncle actually made the furniture. So each piece is made out of sheets of cellulose, which was like an early forerunner to plastic. And her uncle Edgar was badly injured during the war and was bedbound. And he kind of started making the doll's house furniture for Daphne as a hobby. And it went from there really, and she ended up with this beautiful collection of over 50 pieces of furniture. So you'll see that the ones that are sort of see-through cellulose, they're early examples, and then as he became more confident in what he was doing, he started to paint the back of the plastic before he stuck it together, so then furniture became brown to represent wood and things like that, and he could add decoration and things. But it's a beautiful local story that we're very proud to have in the collection.
It's a really touching story. I remember when that came into the collection, and just this idea of this man who really physically was not at his best anymore, but still managed to make these really intricate objects that have even got her name written in parts of it, I think. Or the details are it's like a little piano and everything. It's really, really beautiful. So
yeah, it's an amazing collection. And as soon as she offered it to us, I think everyone was in agreement that it was definitely a collection that we should have. And it's had an amazing response from the public who've been into the museum to look at it. And we've had some interest from online from people as far away as America and things like that. So yeah, it's a really amazing donation.
The Doll's House community is intense.
I love it though. It's such a beautiful, colourful object and really just interesting to look at.
Yeah, and I think because a lot of the pieces are very Art Deco, and they were made during the 1930s, so everything's very specific to that period in time and that moment in Edgar's life, really.
Yeah, it really documents that, doesn't it? Documents that story, and it's really a beautiful story to tell. So there's objects that come into the collection as donations, and then there's objects that come into the collection as acquisitions.
Yes.
What is the difference for our listeners to understand more about those different ways of collecting?
A donation is something that somebody wants to give, gift us, gift to the collection, whereas an acquisition is something that we would pay for and buy. So we don't have a funding stream for actually collecting, but every now and again we do get we do apply for funding so that we can purchase for the collection. We do have the Hanley bequest, which is a pot of money that we can use to purchase work specifically for the art gallery collection. So we've recently just acquired 3 new pieces by 3 local artists from that fund. So that gives us a bit of freedom to build on the art collection where we might not usually be able to, because obviously art can be very expensive.
Is there sort of an aim to acquire? Because obviously with donations, I guess you just have to wait and see what pops up. But when you're making acquisitions, do you have like a target, or is it just if you think there's a gap, or if you see something that you think should be in the collection?
Yeah, so we have 3 main criteria for collecting for the art gallery collection. So it's female artists, which we've been championing for years now, and we really want to build this amazing collection and represent those amazing artists. Craft-focused artwork, so I suppose like ceramics, materials that you would associate with craft, although that difference between craft and art is being blurred, which is nice. And northern talent. So that could be local artists or artists from around the north and the northwest. So that's the main focus really when through acquisition.
And are you just waiting to see something that catches your eye? Like presumably this is partly something that you would do, is see something that you would like to put in the collection.
Sort of, yeah. And a lot of the time acquisitions come from exhibitions. So we'll have had an exhibition of that artist, or that artist would have been represented within an exhibition. So we would look to sort of like plug the hole and there with their work, and build on what we're already doing with the collection.
There's this lovely piece you have here as well that's recently been acquired. It's a painting, I can see.
Yeah.
And it has some beautiful fabric sort of like interwoven into it. Can you talk a bit more about how that has entered the collection and what the story behind that piece of work is?
Yeah, so the painting is a self-portrait of the artist, and it's embellished with this beautiful African fabric, which is representative of the artist's heritage. And it was painted specifically for an exhibition we hosted last year by an artist called Liz Collins. And as we spoke about in the previous podcast, we created this amazing space with all of these artworks by queer artists. And Sam was one of the community curators on that project, and his response to the exhibition was to create this self-portrait. And it's heavily influenced by a piece of work in the collection by an artist called Maud Salter. And when we put both pieces on display, we displayed them side by side, didn't we, Bryan? So they were kind of almost looking at each other, because it's sort of like both pieces of profile. And since then, we took the painting to the panel, and everyone was in agreement that because of the clear link to the exhibition and the fact that Sam's a local artist, that it should be a piece that we try and acquire for the collection. So that's one of the 3 pieces that we've been able to acquire in the last couple of months, which is great.
So I've been wondering, so when the gallery commissions work, so for example, with an exhibition like A Tall Order, there were 3 new pieces of work commissioned by different artists. Do those works automatically come into the collection afterwards, or do they belong to the artist and then it's up to them?
No, there's different sort of like contracts and agreements you can draw up with artists. So you can commission to collect, which means that as part of that project, the work comes into the collection afterwards, or you can commission just for that specific exhibition and it gets shown, but then it goes back to the artist or the gallery afterwards.
And it was just really nice to have that link, I guess, and I think what's really special about the way that you collect as well is that you kind of add into a narrative, aren't you? You're sort of using works in the collection already and artists who've been inspired by them to sort of carry on that story and carry on that dialogue between artists of different generations.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's what was so lovely about Sam's work, the fact that he could have created anything he wanted for the exhibition. There was no sort of like rules on what he could do and how he could respond to the project, and he chose to be inspired. He was inspired by an exhibition that we'd put on previously, so it shows that sort of the value of cultural heritage and having access to it.
So with obviously you were saying that in the early days, the collections were formed from sort of wealthy collectors and local people. Obviously that's changed now. And I know that there's been a lot of work going on in recent years to kind of democratise the collections a bit more and to make them a bit more representative. So can you tell us a bit more about how that process has changed?
Yeah, so as I said before, the focus now is on things having a clear link to Rochdale and the story. So it doesn't have to be, I think in the past, obviously, a lot of people have been been made invisible within museum and art gallery collections. So there's a very conscious effort to actually make sure that we're going forward, we're collecting from our contemporary communities in Rochdale to make sure that they are represented within the collections. So as part of sort of like the co-collecting, which is contemporary collecting programme moving forward, there's an emphasis on making sure that those groups that are currently underrepresented within the collection have the opportunity to tell their stories and have their objects shown in the space.
So will they be decision makers essentially in some respects?
Yeah, so as part of the co-collecting project, there's going to be we're going to form a panel of people from the community to help in that decision making process. So it kind of takes away some of the power from it being a museum and gallery decision, and they have their say on what we should be collecting and how we collect and things like that. And it just makes the whole process a bit more transparent and fair, I suppose.
So I don't know if this is a bit of a tricky question to ask, seeing as there's so many objects in the collection, but do you have a favourite, and what is it?
Yes, I do have a favourite, and it's been a favourite for quite a while now. Like it used to change quite a lot as I discovered new things, but this one's been at the top of the list for a bit. It's a tiny, tiny little faience, which is that turquoise Egyptian pottery that you see. You know, it's very very common colour. Faience amulet of a little fly. So it's got a tiny hole in the top and would have been worn on a cord. But apparently, and I didn't know that, I just used to think it was cute because it was in the shape of a fly. But apparently the fly amulet was given out to soldiers in ancient Egypt because it was seen as a symbol of bravery.
Oh, wow.
So, just like a little brave creature going around. Like,
okay,
so.
I'm going to make you show me this immediately after this conversation because I want to see it now.
I really want to see it too. As well, you were talking about how, you know, some of the objects that we've recently acquired. I was wondering if, like, you could tell us a bit more why it's so important for local artists to have their work in the collections, or for local people to have their objects and their stories told in the museum. What does that mean for communities?
Yeah, I think like historically and traditionally, museums have sort of been quite elitist institutions. Like, we're not the only museum and gallery, but collections we usually started through donations by very wealthy people. So that story that they're trying to tell was very selective, and it was about sort of highlighting and bigging up rich people, basically. And over time, obviously, as things have changed and we're in sort of like a contemporary society, that sort of view and outlook is seen as quite outdated. So I think for museums and galleries to stay relevant, to stay interesting, to stay engaging, that needs to completely change, and everybody needs to be able to feel like they're represented. Like, you shouldn't walk into a museum or art gallery and feel alienated in any way. You should be able to find something you like or something that you feel a connection with, and even stuff that you don't like, and feel comfortable in that space. So by bringing new voices and uncovering stories in the collection, we're helping towards creating a collection that sort of better represents Rochdale and its history as well.
Yeah, I'm guessing that because a lot of museums founded their collections the same way, I guess it's better for institutions to start changing that, so that everybody has a unique story to tell, and it's not all just the same kind of, you know, posh pottery or something that everyone's got.
Yeah, it just gets a bit, like, from a personal point of view, as someone who works with collections every day, it can be a bit boring if all you're hearing is this very dominant, specific voice of, like, white privileged male. Like, that isn't like society, that isn't our communities. Like, we need to have those other voices come through, and they need to be heard, and their objects and even their own voices through oral histories on display in the space.
So obviously the building is shut at the moment for redevelopment. What are the plans for demonstrating the collection in the new Touchstones building? So obviously we'll still use our historic collection, because a lot of the things in it are amazing. But there's a focus now within the programme to collect from actual contemporary collecting within Rochdale, so collecting from people that are living in Rochdale today. And the great thing about that is, because they're actually there to talk about their objects and things, we get a really amazing interpretation of what it is they're donating, or their own stories. Like, we're not getting it down the line third hand from somebody else. We have this opportunity to actively collect from people that are alive today, which is really exciting. So their voices will sit alongside objects from the historic collection to create this, like, just these amazing displays within the new space. It's very exciting.
I'm very excited.
Me too.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Helen, for coming back.
That's okay. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and for giving us insight into this world that a lot of people don't see. You know, that's the very origin of those displays that you see in a museum, and I think a lot of people don't really think about where the objects come from. So fascinating to hear those stories.
You're welcome, and it's great to talk about it. Like, I think it's nice to be really open with what we do. Like, we shouldn't be secretive, and people should know how their collections are being formed and how they can get involved in that.
And where can we find out more about the collections online whilst our building's closed?
So you can access our art collection online through Art UK, and we'll be sharing more of our collections online throughout the redevelopment.
Yeah, so keep an eye on our social media. It's always a great way to find out about the stories that people are coming across in the store, in the collection store every day. And if you want to visualise exactly where we are right now as we're talking to you, and see what goes on at the collection store, there is actually a virtual tour on our website, which we will pop the link into the show notes for you, so it's easy to find.
And once again, thanks for coming back and chatting to us, Helen.
Thank you.
It's been really fascinating to learn more about all the behind the scenes of the collections.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Helen. Well, that was really interesting to hear the process behind that goes into the collections, because I had no idea about most of that stuff. And I especially found it interesting the shape of the collections going forward, the focus on women and on Rochdale and making sure that there is some real reason why something goes into the collection. What did you think, Bryan?
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting as well to learn more about the behind the scenes of how objects and artworks enter the collections. But I'm really excited to hear that we'll be working closer with communities, with a collecting panel, to start making decisions and start redistributing the power in museums.
Yeah, loads to learn from Helen there. But yeah, that wraps up this episode. So back to you in the studio, Rick.
Well, what another fantastic episode. Thank you so much to Helen for making another appearance on the pod. She's always a fountain of knowledge on all things Touchstones. We hope you've enjoyed listening to our conversation. Thank you so much to Audio Always for helping us make this podcast production. We'll be back next month for a brand new episode, but in the meantime, don't forget to follow and subscribe to the Touchstones tapes on whatever app you use to listen to your podcast. We'd love it if you could also give us a follow on socials too. We are at Touchstones_Rochdale on Instagram and search Touchstones Rochdale on Facebook. Bye!